beginning to accelerate. So let's start first with our near neighbour Indonesia, which has recorded that sharp jump in deaths, those figures being confirmed just tonight. Correspondent Anne Barker joins us live now from Jakarta. And what are the numbers that we are hearing, and I guess how convinced people are, or how convinced are people that they are on top of things in Indonesia?
Bev, we heard today that there was a very sharp rise in the number of cases of coronavirus in Indonesia and in the number of deaths. The death rate has gone up from 5 yesterday to 19 today. Most of those are in Jakarta. And the number of cases has gone up from 55 to 227. It does seem like a very sharp rise, but we're told that some of those figures were in fact 5 days old. One of the reasons why the death rate appeared relatively low yesterday was because some hospitals are not passing information on to the national government. And some of the provinces where people have died, for example, or have cases of coronavirus are very far-flung, Sumatra, Kalimantan and so on. But certainly, even though that is a relatively low number still, it does prove what we always suspected, and that was that there is a very undetected amount of coronavirus spreading through Indonesia, and it was happening well before we heard of the very first cases at the beginning of this month. I mean, 19 deaths, again, it's relatively low compared to, say, Malaysia and Singapore, but the figures would suggest, or the statistics would suggest, that the number of cases should be more like 2,000 rather than 200. So certainly there's a lot more testing that needs to be done. There are still only about 1,200 tests that have been done in the entire country compared to other countries around the globe. That's absolutely negligible, and I think that is also one of the big worries here.
What about the coordination from the federal authorities? If you're talking about people gleaning their information from the provincial authorities, is that not a worry that there isn't a proper coordination?
Well, absolutely. I mean, last week we had one death in Bali, a British woman who died in Bali, and it turned out that even though her doctors in the hospital in Bali had been told that she'd tested positive the day before, the government of Bali didn't know until after she died. That was when they rang the national government and asked, what is the case with this patient? And that was when they learnt that she'd actually died. And certainly they should be hearing these things instantly so they can put into place isolation techniques or tracking down contacts and so on. That wasn't the only case where we've heard of provincial governments that aren't being told one thing, and on the other hand, there are provincial governments that have been confirming some of these deaths in the last couple of days, but the national government hasn't known about it. There's a lack of communication in the community here, which means that the public, who just want these basic figures really to know where these cases are, where they should avoid if possible, they're not getting that basic information.
And Anne, is Joko Widodo, the president, coming out on television as we're seeing Scott Morrison telling people what they should be doing to try and combat the virus?
Well, look, there have been messages, mixed messages, if you like. I mean, there's no lockdown in Indonesia like we've seen in Malaysia today and even Manila and parts of the Philippines. There's no quarantine like Singapore has imposed. There is a ban on some travellers coming in. Within Indonesia itself, though, there are very mixed messages. On the one hand, people are being told, stay at home, try and work at home if you can, pray at home. There was even a fatwa by the peak Islamic body in Indonesia saying that don't go to the mosques if there's any chance that you could become sick. But then just today we hear from the former military chief, Gatot Nurmanto, who's effectively encouraging people to go to the mosques. And most worryingly, we've heard today that there are 9,000 Islamic pilgrims from around the world, particularly this region, who are gathering in Sulawesi this week for a 4-day Islamic event, very similar to the one that happened in Malaysia 3 weeks ago, and which absolutely has been blamed for spreading hundreds of cases of coronavirus in Malaysia, Singapore, even Indonesia. Now, there has been a suggestion that people should avoid large gatherings here, but there's no ban on events like this. And so this event is underway. There are more people coming in every day, people who are living side by side, praying side by side. 9,000 people today. It could be more tomorrow. And these are people coming from every province in Indonesia, I'm told, as well as other countries. So Come Sunday, they'll be going home, returning to other parts of Indonesia. If there's any chance of coronavirus circulating among those people, as there was in Malaysia, that could be a disaster in the making.
And Anne, just briefly, Australians, of course, have been urged to come home as soon as possible. Do you think many tourists that might still be in Bali are going to have any difficulty getting back to Australia?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Australian government has been urging anyone overseas to return home. That warning was given in a smart travel advice from the Department of Foreign Affairs a week or two ago, that people in Indonesia should be very aware that they won't get the same level of treatment if they do fall ill. Within Indonesia, just yesterday, the government here changed the visa rules so that people who come in as tourists or even on short stays where they would be getting a visa on arrival, that system is no longer in place. People will have to apply for a visa before they come. Now, that doesn't stop people coming as tourists if they're determined to, but of course it is going to shut down a lot of tourism. It's unlikely that people would go to those lengths, and certainly the lack of flights, the cuts to flights in and out of Indonesia will make it increasingly difficult to come here. So Bali, of course, is the area of Indonesia that suffered the most with a downturn in tourism in recent weeks. That change in the visa rules will absolutely make that even worse.
And Barker in Jakarta, thanks for the update. Well, Australians must